Welcome to this 10th episode of our online seminar series called Revisiting 10 Key TANTlab Papers. It is the final episode, we think, because we have not ruled out making a bonus episode, but more on that perhaps later. Today's topic is care and security, which we will discuss through a paper written by Laura Kocksch, who is here with us, Mathieu Korn, Andreas Poller, and Susan Wagenknecht. Since writing the paper, the first author, Laura Kocksch, has moved to Denmark, where she's now an associate professor in TANTlab. So she is a local from our perspective. Before introducing the paper and the workshop, let me just say that I'm very pleased to see all of you. And also, please know that we will be recording these sessions and that you can find them on the YouTube channel of TANTlab later. My name is Torben Jensen. I'm a professor of Science and Technology Studies and leader of the Techno-Anthropology lab. I'm also one of the 3 hosts of this seminar series. The 2 other hosts are Mathieu Jacomy, who is an engineer and a developer of digital tools and an assistant professor at TANTlab, and Matt Artz, who is located in Philadelphia, where he works as an AI product manager. Matt is a great American friend of the lab and also a mover and a shaker in the American field of applied anthropology. So why are we doing this seminar series? Why are we revisiting 10 key TANTlab papers one at a time? The quick answer, of course, is that we are academics, so we love papers. We read and write papers for a living. But the more serious answer is that we believe that these papers raise questions rather than settle them. Since 2012, the Techno-Anthropology lab has been in the midst of discussions about digital and participatory methods and of how to do science and technology studies and anthropology of technology in our contemporary world. We are particularly interested in how to tell different and perhaps hopeful stories about a world that is full of complex problems and that some people say is perhaps broken beyond repair. The selected papers, such as the one today, offer different inroads into these important discussions. But the papers are only one resource. More importantly, we also have the authors of the papers with us, and with them we hope to bring out the interesting issues. We therefore begin each of these seminars with an author interview. Matt will interview Laura, who is the first author of the paper, to tease out how she and her co-authors were thinking about care and security when the paper was written some 8 or 9 years ago, and perhaps how this issue may have moved and look differently today. After the interview session, we invite all of you to join the discussion. Before handing over to Matt and Laura, let me just briefly mention the bibliographic details of today's paper. The full title of the paper is Caring for IT Security, Accountabilities, Moralities, and Oscillations in IT Security Practices. It was published in the Proceedings of the ACM on human-computer interaction in 2018. The authors, as I mentioned previously, are Laura Kocksch, Mathieu Korn, Andreas Poller, and Susan Wagenknecht. So again, welcome everybody, and without further ado, over to you, Matt and Laura.
Thanks, Torben. Hi, everyone. Hi, Laura. Good to see you again. So looking forward to talking about this. In my little corner of the world, I don't know too many social scientists who are studying cybersecurity. So I really look forward to getting into this. It's maybe even an increasingly needed perspective in the space. So thanks for doing the work that you've done. And to start, I'd like to understand why you actually got into this. Like what drew you to cybersecurity as a field?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to reread one of my own papers, which I think we do way too rarely. All the shameful moments attached to that as well. Yeah, as you said correctly, so this paper we published it in 2018, so we wrote it in 2017. However, as you also see in the story, like the dates go back until I think 15 or so, which is when I first started getting interested in cybersecurity as a topic. And back then it was that I was hired as a student assistant and ethnographer, so in my anthropology studies. like among a bunch of computer scientists and secure software engineering experts. And what they wanted to know was basically how software engineers, how they use the results of, software tests in their everyday development practices. So what happens quite commonly in security is that you write a certain piece of code, a certain software, and then eventually it goes through software tests. And they hired me as an anthropologist to, look into what exactly happens after such a test. And so it was very much like the development, looking into like the everyday development practices of software developers and the role that security plays in them. And you also have two examples actually from that initial study that we did in the vignettes. And then that kind of sparked my interest to look more into security or cybersecurity in particular. So, all the questions related to how do developers and users actually manage security, how, that ranges from what passwords to use to, where do you get code from, how do you test code, do you have several eye reviews and so on. And I've been doing that ever since.
Great, thank you. And now, so, you touched on it there, there's the vignettes in the paper, but building on your own trajectory there, could you tie that together with the other authors and their vignettes and just help us kind of ground the paper? Tell us a little bit about how, that you brought the four ethnographic encounters together.
Yeah. So Andreas, who's the last author on the paper, and we were working together. He's one of the software engineers that I was working with back then. And we had a paper the year before at the same conference, CSCW, Computer Supported Collaborative Work Conference. And we got stuck together in a panel with Matthias and Suzanne. And it was like the last panel of the last session of the, the last day of the conference, which is where, apparently the conference organizers thought, this is like, okay, we can do the little bit of security stuff that we have at this conference in this very awkward position. And that made us, well, and we had lunch and then we started talking and actually, part of the idea for this paper was, to start introducing security really or cybersecurity really as a research agenda within CSCW, which it hadn't really been, because the community was more focused on either users or the introduction of technology in organizations. So that was a bit the motivation of the paper. And in terms of the vignettes, the first vignette that is focused on hacking, that one is written based on Suzanne and Matthias's work that looked at how hackers present their results. White hat hackers, so-called white hat hackers, present their results at a conference. And then the three other vignettes are from work that I've done with software developers.
Good. Thanks. And now, so obviously we're talking about cybersecurity today, but there's probably a dominant narrative of what that is, or at least maybe in the public imagination and maybe in the IT space. And then there maybe is, a counter to that. So how would you, if I was to ask you, what is cybersecurity? How might you define that?
I would say that there's that computer scientists are very good at defining it. So I would start with that. And they define it as all measures taken against adversarial attacks of computer systems. And we say, so in the article, actually, we call it IT security, which would be information technology security. However, in the meantime, I started to talk a lot more about cybersecurity. The difference being that cyber includes sort of bigger information networks. So IT has been like focused very much on individual devices and a little bit, of course, the web. But cybersecurity includes, all kinds of applications, Internet of Things, and so on. So all kinds of digitalized devices. So it's a bit of a broader term. having said that, so that is the official definition of, security is measures taken against adversaries. What a lot of our work, I think, aims at is trying to find local definitions of security. So basically the question of what is, secure enough right now. And you can see that in that paper, but also in other papers that I've written afterwards, that those local definitions are often, very different and very uneasily different. So they are aware that there is the formal definition that should say you have to use a fantastic password and change it every month or so. And then locally, there are very good reasons not to do that, or to share passwords and so on, which is secure enough.
And we'll get into that a little bit more. But before diving too deep into some of those themes, the kind of key move of the paper is care, right? And so, tell us about why you brought care in to this paper to discuss IT security, and where that idea came from for you.
Yeah. So I think so from what I just said, that security is often defined as all the measures taken, right? These within computer science are still seen as largely like either technological measures, right? So tools, updates, software patches, and so on. Or let's say psychological measures, so individual user training and awareness, which already, before we'd written this paper, was sort of brewing, was that some authors said, okay, we also need to include like a collective idea of security, right? So to actually collectivize this question of security. So how do collective information practices actually look like? Then, SDS scholars that we are, we would include in collective not only, more humans, but possibly also, social material arrangements. So kind of the question of how actually security is being crafted through, not just me sitting in front of my computer, but actually through like a variety of, physical arrangements and so on. And sort of this is, I think, one of the first things that this article is trying to do is actually to introduce the practice level to security work that is distributed across social material actors. And then care came in as sort of a way to not just say, okay, we have some maintenance practices, we take care, as of lack of better word, we take care of our technologies, but that we do that with a certain sense of wanting to do things better. So wanting to be more secure, so to improve for the better. So it's not simply maintenance or repair, but it's something, to respond to a, higher purpose, if you want. And the very practical story is that, we had all read Anne-Marie Moll's work and some other scholars' work, and started to think about it in other fields. And, then it originates from, which is medicine.
Thanks. And so, there you kind of gave us the sort of repair framing. And so to me, that speaks to in the paper a little bit of the kind of cure versus care, sort of like the almost perceived one-time fix versus this ongoing contextual kind of always improv, situated, like, right, just this constant, this constant process that arguably will never end, right? And so how do you, would you want to add anything to that kind of cure versus care, framing?
Yeah, I think the way that we portray it in that paper, it's very much a dichotomy, right? So either you produce cures, which are, as you say, these discrete fixes to discrete problems, or you care, which is a bit of a more elusive, ongoing process. I'm not sure I would still frame it as such a strong dichotomy. I think there's ways of, carefully patching things up or carefully, filling some gaps. But I mean, here it works well because I think the thing that it points towards is that that security often is very much driven by, identifying shortcomings and then fixing them up, right? So it's this internal circle of, well, something gets hacked, we patch it up, or something becomes outdated and we patch it up. And we contrast that again with, care in the sense that care can be, we postpone things, we wait things out. Also, we live with things that are broken, that are insecure, that we can't patch up. And that requires a different way of thinking, right? That is not driven by this like constant progress and improvement circle, but much more by a, more maybe slow and often, difficult process of setting things out.
And that difficult process to me also speaks to sort of one of the other framings you use of these oscillations between the secure and insecure. And, it does seem, right, just in everyday practice, but also having worked in tech, very much, right, it is this ongoing, I want to use the word battle there, but I'm trying to be thoughtful of the words I use because of a later conversation in the paper. But it does feel like that ongoing, right? It's like a treadmill that we're always sort of stuck on between these two states. And I think you might make the argument, from a previous conversation that we maybe be just living in a state of insecurity in some sense. So if that is the case, right, and if care is continually needed, where do you land today on like, what might we need to do to try and be secure if maybe it's truly an unattainable goal?
Yeah. So I think the answer to that is probably that we shouldn't do anything different. But that is that a lot of these things already happen, but are just really difficult to make visible. And they are being sort of overshadowed by a very different security conversation that we have, right? And remind you, this paper was written in 2017, like there was no war in Europe. So the way that security is once again become this enormously alarmist conversation that in many regards exactly disables us to actually have a conversation about security that is more about gray zones and enduring things being insecure. And so the sort of the world that sort of one of the arguments I think that we make in this article, but also later on in the work that I did with small and medium-sized companies, is that the big security conversation or imperative, right? That is fueled by you have to react urgently, and this is a global crisis, and you're responsible for God knows what. Hits practices that are like not top-notch high-tech practices. It hits very mundane things, and it hits very mundane ways of making do with technologies. So in small and medium-sized companies, we see, a lot of completely outdated tech, and that's just how it is because, there's no other way to work than with, old machines. So how could we, like, how does that match the ideas of, a perfectly secure world? It doesn't. So there's something happening like in these gray zones that we should become better at actually, helping in than, sort of plotting this big story of a secure and shiny world. And I think this is a bit like, so I don't think it's about doing anything different on the like practice level, but it is about doing something different in the style that we communicate security, in the style that we assume that incidents can be fixed, that they appear suddenly. We argue that, they're sort of slow and emerging and ongoing and partially fixed, partially left open. And
Thanks. And that speaks, to sort of the visibility problem. If in many ways, right, if there's no problem, maybe goes unnoticed. When there is a problem, it becomes an issue. Um, but it also, to me, speaks to, security is, you talk about like small, medium-sized businesses, but not just there, even just like sort of, outside the CISO's office and play, even in large organizations, right? Security is often viewed as a blocker, as something that is challenging, right? It's aside from being invisible in many cases, it also feels like many people, even though they are involved in their own practices that have value and that we need to acknowledge, sometimes it also seems that maybe some view it as, as a problem, right, as a blocker in some sense. So how might we reframe the conversation, building on what you've been saying? How might we reframe it so that all parties, so it's a bit more visible, all parties appreciate it, a bit more appreciate the dynamic nature of it and the way that it's playing out on an ongoing basis already today?
So I think like for that again, important is that we would. So I just told you the story that in one of the companies the security department was sort of dubbed as the Department of No. So it would this is where ideas would end because they would always say no if you brought a new idea up. And I also said then that this is their role, right? This is what they have to do formally. And what happens then again in practice, and what a lot of security experts know, is that they kind of cut deals, like they haggle things out a little bit, like do that one measure this week, and then maybe we can wait a bit, and then maybe in a couple of more weeks we'll do another checkbox of some framework, right? So in a sense, there's something here, and I think we try to describe it about the organizational accountability on the one hand, and the actual practice, and making space for these actual practices. And I think this is something that like resonates with us, maybe at the university as well, where we have formal awareness campaigns that we have to click through, and our organization has to have us do that. But they are, I hope AAU is not listening, basically useless. Like they will not help us make things more secure, but they will help the organization to maintain their compliance, right? So, does that mean we should stop them? Probably not, right? But like where it then gets interesting, I think, from our from our point of view, is how can we turn security into a conversation that will actually that can actually fit particular practices, that can actually, be like a collective learning process if you want, or, how can we adopt these sort of formal regulations and formal accountabilities with very specific practices? And if you're expecting me to answer that question, I can't. But but I think like the concept of care in that sense opens our eyes to these different registers of creating value and creating accountability.
Yeah, thanks. And I think the word you used was dispersed accountabilities, which also reminds me of the article of American Dawn Nafis, who worked at Intel, where she speaks of dislocated accountabilities and a different but similar concept, which I'm increasingly is coming up in my own work related to some stuff. But I think the thing that strikes me there, right, is sometimes the challenge, if you think of accountability from the sense that I think, like the CISO's office might be thinking of it in a lot of ways, sometimes tracking that can be a little bit more challenging than it appears on the surface. And somewhere in that mix, blame can happen, and that blame is maybe not always maybe dispersed in its own right. like evenly. And you sort of speak, you touch on some of the problems of sort of blame, and it sort of, definitely nods to kind of maybe, issues of trust. And so what is your thoughts on, I mean, on how we approach not blaming, right? And not taking that stance, and instead empowering people, and maybe, creating an organizational context in which, really security flourishes as opposed to this blaming approach.
Mhm. So first, I think I need to say that we are quite blaming and shaming the security officers in this paper, which is probably a bit ironic. So I would like to apologize at this place for doing that. Because I mean, again, it has a good reason. Like this is their sort of task, right? And in many ways, they also try to do their best, right? But having said that, I think what is an interesting comparison, and of course that comes through somewhat in the lens of care, is the relationship between parents and children, or between a caretaker and a sick person, right? So there's an amount of fairly strict regulations and rules, like the good thing to do, but there's a lot of negotiation, like there's a lot of attending to the particular situation. And I think with sort of and I think that like sort of the blaming register can be part of that, right? So blaming someone can be a form of care. Paying someone can be a form of care. But it's about sort of opening up the conversation of where do these tactics become ambiguous, like where is space for like negotiation and so on. And I think this is why we thought, like, or why I still think that it's quite useful to speak of care here, because like if we care for someone, it's not like we're gonna fix things for them. Often it means letting them find things out themselves, or knowing that we won't be able to actually improve a situation, like solve a situation, right? I'm thinking also if you care for someone who's terminally ill, like you won't fix that situation, you still want to do best for what you have, right? So there are some practices that lie between solving things eventually and not doing anything. And I think blame can be part of that, actually, but there's other things that are part of it as well.
Thanks. Yeah. And challenges me to think about care in a slightly different way based on that response. I guess slightly building on that, and it would just be maybe a small extension, but towards the end, you wrap up with the idea that, sort of care can sort of make power. And so I guess the question then, and I think it builds on what you were just saying, but how might we do that? Like, how might we attend to that responsibly ultimately?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a discussion that also was kind of forced upon us by the reviewers, I must say, in that particular article. But it's obviously it's somewhat inherent to the notion of care that we might easily get patronizing. And this is something that, like happened a lot afterwards, that this article was actually read by computer scientists who wanted to find a new way of doing cybersecurity. And they would then say, I care for cybersecurity. So I'm the caretaker, the shepherd for cybersecurity here, producing, a very obvious sort of power dynamic. And it's not again, this is not to say that this is a bad thing to be patronizing, but it's something that lies inherent in this register of practice, where, you could say that if you leave the choice to someone, which comes, from the rational, I will just give you the information, you do the right thing. You could say this is an empowering situation because they have all the information, I mean, they're rational beings, independent, and so on. Care builds these, sort of power dynamics that are slightly different. And I think, like, in that sense, I'm happy that the reviewers pushed us because you picked up on it. Because I think that that also creates a very different relationship between, say, a CISO, like a security officer, and people in the company, right? Where he's not saying, here's the right information, run with it. Like, you have the choice, it's your responsibility. But, you know, where responsibility and practice is part of this, you know, this relationship.
Thanks. So I'm gonna ask one more, but then for the sake of time, we should probably open it up after that. But again, the paper was 2018 that it was published. The work was done prior to that. A lot has changed. Arguably, it's becoming easier to carry out, attacks. Where do you see this going for you? What might be an opportunity for you to take it somewhere, or what are you thinking about given our current moment?
Thanks for that question. I think it's a very nice one for me to answer, that I think a lot of the practices that we emphasize here are still exactly the same. They are irresponsive of new technologies. They are, sort of the concept introduced here to focus on care, to have those more fundamental conversations about, responsibility and so on. Those are probably going to continue on, and I've reused them, recycled them shamelessly over the last 7 years for different field sites to make different arguments. But so in that sense, because like the fallacy here is that we think, we have new technologies, so they're going to change, technological practices, right? And that is, of course, the case for many regards, and we need new and frameworks and new rules. But the tinkering part and the trying out and failing and the caring parts probably stay the same. And that is also because, again, we look at a world that is full of old and broken technology. Just gonna let that stand there.
Wonderful. So we'll open it up. Anybody want to jump in?
I will, if I may. There is a temptation to see care as a different version of cure, which would be maybe a feminine version of cure, which might be, I don't know, but it would be a preventive version of cure. So instead of fixing, you would be preventing the breaking. But care is more than that. Now, if you study, I believe, care in the hospital like Anne-Marie Moll, it's more obvious because this is more relatable because this is human beings, and to us it's clear that well-being does not boil down to fixing the disease, but also other aspects. But when it comes to IT security, it is so much less relatable, then this becomes unclear, I believe, and even for me. So, and I also read this paper like this. We kind of know what care isn't, and that's an ordinary version and so on. But why is it so hard to articulate positively what care is that is beyond a different version of cure? What does care for IT security consist of practically that is not the same as a slow version of cure?
Sorry, I had to mute. My office neighbor speaks really loudly. Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think the answer is that as in the cure that we could imagine as part of a care concept for a patient, we can see something in analogy happening here, right? Where we have very formal ways of attending to security, And we have very informal ways and, you know, touching ways and so on. But I think there's also like, I'm also going to take that as an opportunity to say that, you know, we shouldn't think that, you know, caring is just a nice and happy practice, right? It's a very difficult one to care, right? I mean, and you can only care about some things. So it's selective. It's, you know, so it's like there's something sort of, there are harsh decisions that are part of caring. So I like what you said sort of it's painfully difficult to point to that, because I think it's just painful to care for things. Yeah. So I think for me there's a lot of like small scale practices that I could now list, or that we would probably could list altogether, that we do in order to attend to security. I think we write it quite often in the article, without solving anything, without, you know, curing anything, without, you know, without resorting to standardized practice or anything, right? But there's a lot of things we do without conclusively answering or even solving security a little bit.
So you say that we can't summarize them in something as simple as cure because they are inherently distributed. Are you saying that we could, but we are not there yet?
I'm saying that we can't, because they are not, there's no like, how do I say? Well, I think so. Like in the most fundamental sense, I would say that, you know, the cure idea suggests that, you know, we have a problem, we have the solution, we should just, you know, just bring them together, right? It's both sort of predefined, right? Where, you know, the modes of caring are utterly undefined and situated, and, you know, and involve a lot of trials and so on. It's that, but it's also the fundamental idea that this is something we can solve, right? That there's a state, that there's an idea of a state on the horizon where, you know, things will be fine, or things will be secure. And I think I'm resisting that idea that there's ever going to be a state where things will be secure. That doesn't mean everything is breaking down. You know, yeah. Torben?
Yeah, thanks. Great. I think I'd like to follow up on one of the questions or lines of questions that Matt raised. He said something like, you know, how can we communicate differently about cybersecurity, given that this sort of care work is hard to sort of articulate and put into words, and it's something that maybe those who are hired to cure cannot say this sort of publicly, that they're also doing a lot of tinkering and all that, and how can we, also another good question from Edward, sort of how can we reframe the conversation, and I just wanted to sort of nudge you to perhaps say something about a thing that we've been playing with, developing dilemma games, cybersecurity dilemma games, which was sort of specifically an attempt to try to stage a different kind of conversation. And perhaps you could speak a little bit to that and our experiences with trying to develop a conversation by getting people together to play a game.
Yeah, that's what you were fishing for, I see.
That's what I'm fishing for. Yeah. Shamelessly, sorry.
Okay, well, sure. So, okay, before I talk about that game, I think one of the things that is really important to say is that, as you also say, like experts make a lot of invisible arrangements, and the visible sort of bending the rules and all of that. But for security in particular, and we may, you know, see fields where we would say, okay, that's fine, right? We think about maybe other fields of maintenance or so, where we might say, you know, okay, like adaptation of rules, right? But for security, like they have to stay invisible. Like we can't make those public. Like we can't make public that security officer X at company B does some negotiation when it comes to password security, you know. So there's a good reason why those are invisible, which sort of, yeah, so it's not easy to make those visible. Anyways, but yeah, so one of the things that I've developed with Torben, Elgaard, Jensen, which is very nice, is that we have started thinking about if the dominating way of thinking about security is as a, you know, series of solutions, or as like a way that, you know, we always have to match the attackers, right? What if we try to change our engagement with security? So as I've also mentioned, we have a lot of awareness measures out there that would basically you know, try to engage you in the right answer, and give you interesting ways of arriving at the right answer to a preformed problem. That's how security is often communicated, right? So there's the right answer out there, you just have to know it and put it into practice. What we have done with the dilemma game, which is a small board game that we have played with particularly cybersecurity experts, is that we try to engage them in a conversation where, you know, there is no obvious right answer, but rather they are confronted with like real practical dilemmas that we found in companies, where, you know, even the greatest expert are a bit like, well, helpless in the sense of, you know, okay, there's no cure here. Like there's no cure in our prescription book that we can throw at this. So what do we do? And those have sort of, yeah, and so in that game, and this obviously being, you know, a game, it's a very, you know, it's kind of a small window, a small opportunity into thinking a bit differently about the issue of security. Yeah, we have sort of managed to have experts actually engage in these more like practical dilemma situations and what to do with them. Also giving them, you know, quote unquote, only the means that small companies have. So this is not you're going to invest 1 million kroner the next year in security, but it is, you know, maybe have a coffee with someone. Would you like to add something, Torben?
No, I just yeah, I could, you know, elaborate that. I think, you know, first of all, it's been really fun developing those games with you and with that sort of enormous background knowledge you have of the field. And I think what we have experienced in Denmark, as you have experienced before in Germany and elsewhere, is that you can easily run into authorities and cybersecurity experts who will just tell you basically something like, there is a cure. We know what the companies should do, and then they will be secure. But we have, and we thought that, you know, and the implication of that is that, you know, the companies should be kind of blamed for not, you know, taking the pill and adopting the security measures and so on. And what we have discovered by throwing these dilemmas and this game at them is that it is actually possible to sort of break open a different kind of conversation about all the messy realities and limited resources and dilemmas that are facing, for instance, small and medium-sized companies. So even though there is a sort of a big prevailing narrative that is not talking about difficult sort of tinkering work or caring work without sort of an obvious goal, then it is possible to sort of embark on that conversation with people, or nudge them into that conversation, or lure them into it by means of a fun game, you know. So I think there is I think it was a fun intervention to make and a fun way to strike up a different conversation with cybersecurity experts. And so in that sense, it was also a sort of a practical device, whereas you could probably read this paper as sort of a that's a theoretical and also empirical way of talking about sort of a kind of reality and practice that is difficult to put into words. Now you can elaborate. You want.
Yeah, maybe there are some more questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Should I? David.
Sorry. Just on Zoom, trying to find it again. I was just thinking about how this invisible work gets pushed down then onto the end user. And in your field work, did you notice that consideration come up much? So, and how potential the circumvention of the particular practices that they're trying to make end users, so say an employee writing down a password, say. So rather than having the care work and invisible work pushed on me to now remember extra passwords and extra two-factor authentication and signing up for that and maintaining that, was there a discussion around that? Because I can see it happening in this game situation, maybe without giving any specific examples, but do they think about different types of end user as well with different abilities and knowledge?
Yeah, so I mean this paper, like these are software developers, right? So they have certain, so they come from that particular world, and basically what we tried to do was to understand them as sort of the, the ones on whom security is being pushed down on, right? Which is from the sort of security officers and the penetration testers and so on, and the hackers in that sense, like a bit by proxy. So I think there is like what I can easily say is that what happens if we consider security a choice, right, is that there's always someone who knows better and who will tell you, like this is the way to go, and you should do that. And then if that is the case, like the relationship between the one pushing it down on you and you is that you will never tell them, well, I actually wrote this down and, I'm actually like trying to circumvent your rule, right? Which is a very different relationship than you could imagine between, someone who says, we have this rule, let's try to make it work for you. Which happens as well, again, it's not like a new thing that we're inventing. But your question is it pushed down on the end users? Yes, and there's a huge conversation within cybersecurity that is about basically disenfranchising the user entirely. So like just taking security away from the user, right? So, I mean, and there's a lot of ways that this is already happening that, we have, by default, password managers and so on built into tech. We have certain Excel macros, for example, that we're for 15 years, I think Microsoft is trying to get rid of. Doesn't really work because there's still some wonky people using Excel to run nuclear power plants or something. So it is an attempt that goes in the same sort of, in the same direction where you say, either we're going to tell you the right way or we're going to take it away from you. We're going to take away your toy. And I guess like, yeah, so there's a lot of those conversations. It's not, I think without having done studies on users that much on security, it's not working well, right? Because you just continue living with, Excel macros.
Oh, hi, me again. Quick follow-up on the game. So, having participated in like tabletop exercises, which are game-like in some sense, I'm wondering if you can comment on the impact of the game so far, because in my experience, a lot of people walk away very excited and then they kind of get like back into their normal routine and like I'm not sure all of the lessons learned always get applied. That could be my context. I'm not saying it's yours. I'm not saying right, but are you seeing anything like that, or have you found a way to kind of crack that?
So my initial, that's why I chuckled a little bit, was to say people walk away very depressed from our game, actually. But that's also not entirely true. So I mean, so I see that there's a lot of also compared to other tabletop, other security tabletop exercises, security trainings, where it's a lot about capture the flag, like let's hold together against the enemy, and so they're very antagonistic often. That is not the case here, right? So the means that we give them are very ordinary. So they're very boring. So we're not talking about, fixed security or, be able to, develop a new tool or something or a new measure, but we're talking about, very ordinary attempts of tackling a dilemma. So I think that's something I can say, but also I mean, we had sessions where, during the game, players who again were security experts, right? So we try to make an intervention on the expert level, not so much on the user level where it would usually lie. Was that they would fully play along and then tell us like this was interesting, and one sentence later they would start saying again, these stupid companies, like why can't they get their shit together? So mixed. But also to say that we had great collaborators in the Danish Business Authority whom we worked with, who told us that these dilemmas, right? So the description of like the difficult situation to handle that SMEs have to handle, they reported that those dilemmas sort of traveled further. So they kept referring to them like a year after or something, to sort of state, hey, with this new product that we're now bringing out on the market, have we actually considered what this would look like in that dilemma? So small impact. We're not like revolutionizing security, I think.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
David.
I think I was just before Torben. I was just wondering, I know you were saying it's 2017, this paper, and so we've got way more AI tools out there now. And I know at Allberg we've had an AI assistant, and there's a proliferation of such tools out on the market, and other organizations actually with the projects I'm working on, where there's had to be new mandatory trainings come out for IT security with all these different AI tools. And this is kind of when one of the vignettes they're talking about keeping their data secure and how they don't think that that's possible. Do you think that that's just now the horse is bolted in that, and IT security professionals just realizing that and being like, okay, we can't control this, so what do we do to manage this, rather than necessarily find a cure for this? And have you been working in that area currently?
I'm not working in AI security. No, I'm working in legacy. No, old printers, like printers from 1970s. No, but okay, I'm not entirely sure. So you're referring to the trainings, like the new sort of awareness campaigns that include AI assistance?
Which is commonly how it gets forced down on everyone within the organization, right? They'll come up with a new training to try and manage something, saying don't, pass on your data to AI software, don't have these AI assistants in meetings making transcriptions and making minutes automated. But there's so many different versions of that out there now that it's very hard to blacklist, I guess, all of them. So then you'd go to maybe a whitelist solution if you were trying to find a cure, but that's impossible, probably.
Yeah.
Maybe some people would push that forward. So I guess I was interested, how do you think they'll be attacking that problem?
So I mean, it seems that the windmills are just becoming more, but the tactics that we have remain the same, right? Is that what you're saying? So, but like it continues to be a fight against windmills, and I think it has been that for a really long time. And the measures that we take have their reasons. They are partially, as I said earlier, like organizational responsibility, like the university has to do something. And push it down on us by force of department sanctions. But also I think there's a bit the dimension of you know, what if we didn't do that, right? So what if we like would just say, okay, let's just accept everything is insecure and let's just stop trying to tell people to do better. That's not the answer, right? I mean, we're not saying, okay, let's stop awareness campaigns against smoking, right? Just because people will always smoke. But we, you know, we tolerate and we accept the sort of collectively the risks of that. So I think there's some, so what I'm trying to say with that is not, you know, that we like that we just normalize everything and it's just all fine, or you know that we should fall into the full promises of awareness campaigns because they just work to a certain level and they are a huge market, by the way.
All right, and I'll just ask a quick question and then we have to round up. It's a question I've prepared. I've mentioned it to you already, Laura. I'm sort of that when I read this paper, I was kind of tricked by there's this really strong moral stance that blaming and shaming is wrong. So that's sort of if there's sort of a clear evil in this paper, then it's people who shame and blame others. So and you know, so I wonder if, you know, do you have any reflections on that now that you have reread the paper? Is that sort of a sort of is it still sort of unquestionable that shaming and blaming is bad? You apologize for shaming and blaming the awareness people, I guess. So any thoughts on that?
Very suggestive question. Thank you. I mean, good. Okay, I'm gonna say that, of course, like STS in general, and now this has been recorded, has the tendency to like sit on the high moral horse, right? So we know, like we can identify others people moral registers and say, but what about another one, you know? And I think that's a very difficult stance to take. Especially as I just said, and you know, of course, you know, when you try to work with people. So this is not a stance where you will productively work together with a security officer if you tell them, you know, you are just you know, blaming and shaming people. What are you actually doing? So the answer is would maybe slightly rephrase today.
All right. On that note, I think it's a good note. Would slightly rephrase today because that sort of speaks to the continuation of the discussions that we have here. I just want to thank you, Laura, for sharing these discussions in this paper with us. Thanks to you, Matt, for asking great questions as always, and thanks to everybody for participating in this very lively discussion. This was so far the final episode of this series. It's been a joy and a pleasure to be hosting it together with Mathieu also. Yeah, again, thanks everybody for participating and take care out there.